Are you looking for some adorable Valentine's Day artwork you can use for cards, gifts, or decor? Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. Today we're going to draw and color each of these sweet pieces of art in watercolor pencil. I'll teach you how to layer and then blend your colors for beautiful results. Let's go ahead and get started. For supplies, I have watercolor pencils by Faber-Castell as well as some Canson watercolor paper that I've cut up. And that allows me to just make these like tiny little pieces of art, or I could adhere them to the front of a card. I'll include some links to my favorite supplies in the description below. So I'm going to go ahead and start the teddy bear by drawing a circle for the head. And as you can see, I've got this reference photo here I'm going to be using just to give me a little bit of guidance. And I'm noticing that the body is almost the same height as the head, which you wouldn't necessarily think, but that's the way it is when he's sitting down. So I'm going to draw it that way. And then I'm going to kind of follow how his arms are looking and just lightly kind of sketch them in. I'm being pretty tentative. And then I'm noticing about halfway down his body is where the top of his feet are. So if you kind of want to give yourself a little guideline for about where half is on your drawing, and just go ahead and draw those. They're just basically ovals. And then I'm drawing a smaller oval in the inside of his feet. You can see I'm working pretty tentatively. When I am working from a photo, I tend to kind of look back and forth from my photo to my drawing and just try and eyeball get those shapes more or less what I'm seeing. Again, this is just a cute little drawing, and so it doesn't have to be 100% precise. Finally, for his snout, it's another circle or oval, and it's not quite halfway up his face, but about there. And then we're going to draw in those little eyes. And it looks pretty goofy right now. I'm just refining the snout shape a little bit. And then we'll draw in the nose. Try that again. Okay, I think I'm happier with it that time. And then I'll just draw a little line down here. Refine his eyes a little bit. And then I'll just go ahead, draw his little ears in. Then let's add a bow with a ribbon. So I'm starting out with a square that's a little bit rounded on the edges, and then I'm going to draw these two little rounded parts of the bow on either side of that, and then a couple ribbons coming down, just like this. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go grab this watercolor pencil. This is my terracotta, but it's kind of a golden brown, and I'm just going to outline the whole teddy bear because I want to get rid of some of my pencil lines, and I'm just going to preserve my lines with my watercolor pencil. The watercolor pencil will not erase as easily as the regular graphite pencil will. So I'm just quickly covering all these lines. Then I'm grabbing my pink and I'm doing the same thing for the bow. Again, just tracing it really. And then I can go ahead, grab my eraser, and I'll be able to lighten all that graphite without completely losing the bear. And it will allow me to have a nice outline that isn't quite so gray. Then I'm going to go ahead and just use that same color and fill the whole teddy bear in. And I'm just using kind of a medium pressure, nothing special here. You don't have to do any special coloring. I do have a slight bit of a circular motion in my coloring. It tends to be a bit smoother than if you completely just kind of scribble or crosshatch, but you can do what works for you because a lot of these lines are going to disappear when we add the water. And then I'm just taking that same pencil and I'm just doing a few little scribbles around the outside of his head, his ears. This is just giving him a little bit of a furry look. This is optional, but I think it's kind of cute. So I'm just doing a little bit of that. The snout has less texture, so just be aware of that as you do his little snout. And then I'll just quickly go around his body doing the same thing. Let's take a quick minute to discuss our colors now. So I've got here with me a scrap of paper, and I'm just going to quickly color some of my terracotta on here. Then I'm grabbing this color that's called Caput Mortuum, I think is how you say it. I'm just going to call it my medium brown though. And then this is an indigo blue or dark indigo. These are all by Faber-Castell, and that's what I'm going to be using for my teddy bear. However, you could use 3 different shades of brown as I'm doing here. So this is golden ochre, burnt sienna, and a nice dark rich brown as well. It's kind of a chocolate brown. So you could definitely use 3 shades of brown, or if you are using Faber-Castell, you can use the same colors I'm using here. And I'm just going ahead and moistening them with my brush. I have my paper towel here so that I'm not saturated and wet. It's a fine line between being a little bit too dry and the color won't blend. But if you're too wet, you can end up kind of almost having those colors bleed together a little bit too much and you end up losing that color. And you're also going to be working from the lightest sections of your painting to the darkest. The same way I blended these little swatches here. So let's move on to our teddy bear. So I'm grabbing that brown color. Actually, you know what? Let's get some shadow on here first with my terracotta color. So I'm going to do that. And I'm kind of thinking about my light source being on the upper right side of my work. And so I'm not going to be following the reference photo exactly. And so the shadow is always going to be a little bit more to the left and a little bit more to the bottom of each of these shapes. So you're going to notice I'm putting heavier pressure as I come more to the left and more to the bottom. I'm also doing that with his arm here. And then it's also going to be dark under the bow. It's just going to be like the bow is casting a nice shadow on his body. And so his body is going to be really dark, kind of around that bow area. And then finally a little bit at the lower section of his snout. I think I like that. And then I'll just kind of fill in any other areas that I want to get a little bit more shaded here really quickly. Then I'm going to grab my middle brown and I'm just going to go ahead and add some fur and shading just again on the left side of the teddy bear, kind of on the lower sections of each shape. We'll do his little snout here and his nose. Again, there's going to be shadow under his chin. And I'm just kind of using a bit of a scribbly motion here. And by scribbly, I just kind of mean something like this. So I'm just kind of going up and down to create like short, tiny little fur. You can even move your hand position a little bit, do something like that. Some of this is going to get blended out as we add our water, but it does add a nice touch to kind of just keep the fur texture in mind as we add our shadows. And I'm really just going over all the shadow areas where I have already put that terracotta as being darker. I'm just going over all those same places with the brown. So I'm really just pushing those shadows further. So it's pretty easy at this stage. I'm almost just tracing. Speaking of fur, I'm so excited to share that I'll be teaching a live watercolor pencil course on Zoom soon. This beginner-friendly course will cover essential techniques and we'll create beautiful projects together, animals, florals, and nature-inspired art. I remember when I was struggling with watercolor painting years ago. I found a local class for people who had watercolor pencils sitting on their shelf but didn't know how to use them. That was me. That course changed everything. It helped me unlock watercolor pencils and finally achieve the results I was after in my traditional watercolor painting as well. I also love the small group setting where I could ask questions and get feedback. That's exactly the kind of experience I want to offer you. Since I'll be working closely with students, spots will be limited. My email subscribers will hear about it first, including access to a special introductory rate for this first session. So if you're interested, be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you don't miss out. And then finally, I'm coming in with my indigo, and I'm not going to want to put too much of this. This is a dark blue, and it works really well to make a nice kind of a rich brown color, as you saw already. But if you overdo it, the blue will show up too much. So you want to be kind of careful if you're doing the same colors as me, that you don't overdo the blues. You can always push your shadows further later if you need to, but you don't want to overdo it. Just going to throw a tiny little bit more of the medium brown in here because that's probably the color I'm going to mainly want for my shadow color. It's going to help keep that blue from getting a little too intense. Finally, I'm picking up my pink and I'm just going to quickly and lightly fill in these little paws. This is where, again, where I'm taking artistic license because I want them to be Valentines. And then for my shadows on each of these little pink sections, again, this is where you really see that kind of crescent shape happening in the shadow. Filling a tiny bit into his ears here. And then I'm going to just fill in the entire bow with the same color. So I'll go in afterwards and throw in some shadows. So for now, I'm just basically just coloring it in pink. And this is a really intense pink, so I'm not pushing too heavy. Then I'm picking up a darker pink, almost red, but it is kind of on the pinky side, and I'm going to fill in the inside of this bow. And then each of these little shapes of the bow, again, I'm thinking lower left for the shadows. Put some on each of these, again, a little bit right under the knot, if you will, of the bow, and then on the left side of each ribbon. Let's add a little shadow too. So I've got my same middle brown and indigo, and I'm just using kind of the side of the pencil, and I'm just gently laying in some colors. So the brown color, then the indigo color, back to the brown color. I want the indigo to be closer to his body because that's where the shadow is going to be the strongest. And then as I'm coming away from his body, I'm putting more of this kind of brownish color on here. All right, time for the water. So I've wet my brush. I want it to be kind of medium damp, not soaking wet. And I'm just going to drop that water in the lightest section of the teddy bear first. So I'm just going to go over everything, lighter areas, and then gradually work into the darks like you see me doing here. And to keep the texture, I'm kind of like almost bouncing around with my brush. As you can see, I don't want to go like brush strokes so much. I'm just doing all these short, tiny little, almost jiggles, if you will, to be able to get the texture that I want and to not blend this out too much. So just a lot of tiny little bounces with just enough water to kind of get it to blend how I'm wanting it. So you can see his face is still maintaining some of that furry look. So I'm going to do the exact same thing for his arm. Pay attention to the little fur on the sides and then into the shadows, and then just blend it out just enough. I don't want to lose my lights. So again, work in the light section first, then come into the darks and blend them around just enough. Just refining the edge of his arm there. All right, filling in his body, and once again, as I said before, lights first, using a little bit of a jumpy motion as I come in towards my dark sections. I didn't wash my brush there because I didn't mind pulling a little bit of the dark outwards into my lights. Just gently moisten those darks and just drag them up a tiny little bit into the light, just so that you get a nice smooth transition happening. And you can see the exact same thing is happening with his little paws here. Light first, dark second. Just gently bouncing around. I'm happy with the amount of blending. All right, for his snout, I think I need more color here. It almost feels too light. So I'm just picking up a little bit of terracotta right off the pencil using my wet brush, and I'm just adding that straight to his snout. Don't want to be too wet here. And again, I'm still kind of using a little bit of that, I don't know, jiggling motion with my brush just to get it how I want it. Yeah, I think that's cute. Now let's wash and dry my brush, and I'll come into the shadow area. So I like to start kind of almost where my brush is on the white of the paper, and then just kind of drag into the darks. Wash and dry my brush, come where it's white, and then kind of work my way into the darks once again. So I'm working pretty much from the white into that brownish color, and then finally into the indigo. So really just starting with my lights, working into my browns just enough to blend them, and then I want to leave it alone. Once I'm happy with how much it's blended, I just want to leave it. I'll just add a tiny bit of water into his ears to blend them. That feels too intense for me, so I'm grabbing a little bit of my terracotta, just dropping it into the wet of the pink of his ears. This is optional. I just felt like that pink was too intense, but you can do what you want. You could either use a lighter or softer, duller pink to start with, or just kind of do what I'm doing here and just kind of gently blending that terracotta into the pink. I'm going to do the same thing with the feet. So I start my lightest sections, go from the light to the dark. To get it blended, and once again feeling it's too intense, so I'm picking up a bit of that terracotta and I'm just going to drop just enough of it in to kind of tone that pink down and just, I guess you could say, harmonize it with the rest of the teddy bear. And then I'm going to go ahead and let it dry. Okay, once it's dry, I'm coming into the bow with the same technique I've been using, where I moisten or blend the lightest sections of the little bow and then come into the dark sections. Then start another one. Wash and dry my brush, blend the light, and then work my way into the dark. Wash and dry my brush, blend the light, and then work my way into the dark. The whole concept of working from light to dark is something beginners can struggle with, and it can make their paintings end up flat. And so you really want to pay attention to just always starting out with your lights and then working your way into your darks. I know, I'm getting redundant here. Once your teddy bear is fully dry, then you can come in and add a few extra details if you feel like you want to push the fur a little bit more. I found one area was kind of almost like washed out right here, where the water just kind of made a funny puddle. And so I'm just putting more darks right on that same spot, using my same colors that I did before. And you really could decide at this point, if you like the texture of the dry pencil, you really wouldn't even have to blend it out with water. But I think I'm going to go ahead and just use a fairly damp brush, less water than I even had before, and just very gently come in and just blend those darks ever so slightly, just so that I have that watercolor look still. But like I say, it's totally optional, and you could leave them dry if you prefer. All right, let's go do his little eyes. I definitely wanted to wait till the end for this. And I'm using my two dark colors once again, this brown color and the indigo blue. And I'm just gonna basically just fill them in. Maybe make them a little bit bigger so they look a little cuter. I'm just layering one color right on top of the next. You definitely want your paper to be dry when you're doing this. I'm gonna push the color on his nose a little further too. And we'll fix that little line on his snout. You can't really see much of his smile, so I'm not really worrying too much about it here. Let's just put a little more shading. Yeah, I think that's actually kind of cute. He looks a little bit smiley, but it's shaded. A little bit more terracotta just to kind of even that out a bit. And then I'm just going to use the darker pink and push my shadows just a little bit more where I feel like my details may be getting lost. And then I'm using this dark purple to really push those shadows a little teeny bit further. So I'm not getting a whole lot on here, but you can see things are getting just a smidgen darker in the shadow areas of the bow. And then finally, I've picked up the indigo blue and I'm just putting a very small touch of that into the darkest parts of my shadows. This is optional because you could see the bow was kind of cute already as it was, but now it's just popping just that little bit more because we pushed the shadows. And I'm pushing the shadows again under his chin. All right, let's grab that water. And I'm going to want to be fairly dry for this next step. And I'm just very carefully moistening his eyes and his nose, doing a little tiny bit of just blending in the snout. Again, I still am thinking working light to dark so that I don't lose my lights. Just gently blend that around, come into his neck area again. And now I'm going to come in, wash and dry my brush, and work on the bow really carefully. Again, this stage, as I said before, you want to be pretty dry. You want that moisture on your brush to be able to still blend, but you definitely don't want to be getting things flowing too much. All right, now the final thing we're going to do is add some little highlights to his eyes. So we want the paper to be completely dry. So you're going to want to dry this first. Then you're going to come in with your white watercolor pencil and just put a tiny little dot of white on each eye. And if it's not showing up as bright as you would like it to, you can just grab your little water cup, dip your white watercolor pencil directly in there, and the paint is going to kind of get moistened a bit, and you're going to be able to just add that highlight with your moist watercolor pencil. This is not something I do very often, but it does work if you want just a bolder little highlight there. Yeah, something like that. And I'll just grab a little bit of indigo and just kind of tweak that a smidge. And there's our cute little teddy bear. Okay, so for my cupcake, I'm going to start by drawing a line down the center of my page. We call this an axis line when we're doing cylindrical objects. Now, a cupcake isn't something that has to be extremely precise, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this technique anyways. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw an ellipse. This is kind of like an oval shape, and I'm going around several times just to kind of get something that I'm happy with. I'm working pretty lightly, but as you know, I'll cover this with darker colors here in a minute. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom, and then I'm just going to connect those at the side, and this is going to form our cupcake liner. Let's just tweak that bottom one a little bit. I use this technique with things like mugs or other more structured cylindrical objects, and so I'll include a link to my mug video below, although you will get to see me using this technique a little bit on our latte cup. Then I'm just going ahead and I'm drawing all these little lines or creases and folds in the cupcake liner. And as you can see, as I move closer to the outside of the liner, those little creases and folds are going to become just a little bit tilted, if you will. I'm also making those little lines get closer together, and that's just giving the impression that this cupcake, is kind of receding away from us as it comes to the sides. And it's helping it look like it is a cylinder. All right, let's go ahead and do the cake itself. So I'm just going to build that up a little bit and make a line here for where I want the base of my icing to be. And again, I'm following the line of the ellipses that made our cupcake liner. So I'm just kind of running almost parallel to that. Then I'm going to draw our first loop of icing. It's kind of going to be like a wave. It's hard to describe this shape. You can just kind of copy the shape you see me drawing here, or grab yourself a reference photo and you can draw your icing using that. I'm trying to be really simple though with my icing. I don't want to do like a lot of fancy icing. I want to kind of make it look like these are just kind of nice little swoops, swoops of icing, if that's a word. And then I'm going to draw the heart on the top, but you're going to have the bottom of the heart kind of disappearing into the icing. So just gently draw that in. And you know what, with these icing, I think I need to kind of tweak them just a little bit. Make it look like it's kind of coming behind the heart a little bit right there. And then each layer of icing really is sitting on top of the one below it, isn't it? So I'm just kind of pulling those down a little bit to give the impression that that icing is indeed almost stacked. So just fix that up for you guys here. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before and just trace everything with my watercolor pencil so that I can get rid of some of these graphite lines. So I'm going to use my pink first for the icing. Then I'll grab my terracotta for the cake part of the cupcake. And then I'm going to go around and do these tiny little triangle or zigzag shapes to kind of show the top of the cupcake liner. You could actually do this with the cupcake liner color as well if you prefer. I'm going to do it with the cake color. Probably either way will be fine. And I'm putting one of these little zigzag triangles, if you will, right on top of each of the little lines I drew earlier. And you can just kind of eyeball that. You don't have to be super precise. Then I'm going to do the cupcake liner with my dark indigo, but I'm pushing very lightly because I don't want to go overboard. And you could also do the same thing with the folds in the cupcake liner. I wasn't 100% sure how I was doing it at this stage, and so I just kind of lightly erased them and left them there so that I could see them, but you're going to see I do end up tracing them with the indigo fairly soon here, so you could just go ahead and do that right now. And now for the icing, I'm going to use my pink and just very softly color the far left side once again. So our shadows are going to be again on our left lower part of our cupcake. And I'm just going to kind of fill these in. And yeah, you can kind of see it is almost like a crescent shape now, isn't it? So I'm just filling that in with my pink very softly, lightly. This is an intense pink, as you know, so I don't want to push too hard too soon. And I want my icing to be nice and light and soft. Then for my heart, I'm going to just gently kind of sketch in where I want my highlight to be so that I don't fill that in with pink. Then Grabbing my pink pencil, I'll just fill the whole thing in pretty much like I'm coloring in a coloring book. So no special techniques here. Then I'm picking up my darker pink / red pencil. This is kind of a pinky red, and I'm gonna go ahead and just do the shadow. So again, more to the left and more to the bottom. I'm gonna just put a tiny bit kind of along the outline, just a little bit, and then over here, this is gonna be blocked by the light too. So let's just put a little bit of shadow right there. And you can already see this little heart starting to kind of get a three-dimensional look, isn't it? And we haven't even added the water yet, so this cupcake is going to be a lot of fun. All right, let's go ahead and throw in some shadow for our cupcake, just the same way we did with our teddy bear again. And again, the shadow is going to be cast more towards the left of the cupcake, and I'm using that same brown on its side. I'm just filling in some shadow, a little bit harder pressure or heavier pressure as I come closer to the cupcake, a little lighter as I move away from it. And then once again, I'm picking up my indigo blue. I'm going to throw that in the shadow, but let's quickly do these little lines here. If you've already done that, that's great, but I'm going to just go ahead and just really lightly trace all the little creases and folds in my cupcake liner. And this is definitely where you could choose any color for your cupcake liner, right? I picked this dark indigo, but honestly, I think a teal would be really cute. Even a yellow. You can go with whatever color you think would look cute here. Then I'm going to just take that same indigo and quickly put some at the base for my shadow, just kind of really on top of the brown. And once again, I want to have a little bit more indigo as I come closer to the cupcake itself. So that shadow gets nice and dark. Shadows tend to get darker as they come closer to the object that's casting them. And then as the shadow moves away from the cupcake, it gets a little bit lighter. I think I'm going to even go ahead and just put a tiny touch more brown. Okay, I think that's good. Finally, I'm going to grab my terracotta and I'm just going to fill in the cake section of my cupcake. And I'm kind of using a little bit of a circular motion to do this. I'm going to get even more texture when I grab this brown though. So let's go ahead, get the brown on, and there's going to be more of a shadow directly under the icing. So I'm going to go a little darker there and just kind of fill that in. As you can see what I'm doing here, just trying to almost make that dark line I just made disappear into the cupcake itself. And using very textured, kind of scribbly, circular coloring. I really like the texture I'm getting here. So that's the nice thing about watercolor pencils is it's pretty easy to get some nice textures without too much effort. Maybe a tiny bit of that indigo. This is going to push those brown shadows. You know it can be done. You've seen it on the teddy bear, right? But we don't want to go overboard. All right, let's get our water and just start by putting it in our lightest sections. So as you know, it's almost white here, or it is white. And we're just going to moisten that first with water and then bring that water very gently into our pink sections. And just, you can see how that's just blending around. And you could do this section, let it dry, and then do the next sections, but you know what? I'm going to do all the white, or I should say all the icing sections at once, and just let the colors kind of mingle a little bit together, as you can see them doing here. I'm still maintaining a little bit of the separation between the icing blobs, and you know what? I'm going to come in and I can define those even further with a second layer of watercolor pencil. I'm just going to lift a little bit of the pink out of the light side so I get some nice highlights. So basically washing my brush, drying it, and dragging some paint out. All right, I'm going to just take these one at a time, and you can see I can do a few, and then I'm going to kind of wash and dry my brush. Sometimes I'll just dry it, come down with a moist brush, wash and dry. Sometimes I can do a few of these shapes, and when I feel like I'm getting too saturated, I'll wash my brush off and then dry it. And because I want more light over here, I'm actually just lifting again. So basically lift, wipe my brush, lift, wipe my brush, and then every now and then wash that brush off so I get the pigment right out of it. And then I'll just come down and do all these little shapes. Once again, I did a few at a time, as you can see, as I got towards the shadow side. I don't mind them kind of mushing together, and they don't fully mush, do they, with watercolor pencil? I don't mind the amount of blending that's happening here. All right, and into the shadows. Same thing as before. Start where it's white, work into the browns, finally into the blue. And I'm not minding if that shadow ends up kind of blending right into the bottom of my cupcake liner, I can define the shapes a little bit more again, but I don't mind a little bit of blending between the cast shadow and the cupcake liner itself. So I think I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna let that dry and then I will come back in and do the other shapes. Actually, before I do that, why don't I throw a little bit of shadow on the side of the cupcake? So everything's kind of moist still on my icing, and I'm just taking some of that dark indigo directly off my pencil with my brush, dropping it into the wet sections of my icing, and just gently blending it around. And you can see I've put way too much and I'm lifting a little bit out. But I kind of like that. I feel like it gives it just a bit of shadow without being too intense. All right, so I've gone ahead and let this dry completely, and then I'm going to come in now and do our little heart. So I'm starting where it's light, but I'm leaving that highlight alone, and I'm just going to kind of moisten the light section of the heart. Then I'm going to come in and just gently blend the darks. So they're going to kind of automatically blend right in to our lights. So just moistening it, make sure I'm not too wet. This is where you do want to be fairly dry. And then I'll just go ahead and come into my shadow on the left side here and again blend it out. You can see that it's just creating just a beautiful three-dimensional look to this little heart. And I'm working very carefully, and as I said, not too wet with this section. Just make sure I'm happy with where it's kind of meeting the icing. I don't want to have really jagged edges here. Then for the highlight, I'm going to go ahead with a clean brush and I'm going to just put some water kind of around the outside edges of this highlight. I'm actually going to end up filling this whole highlight in with water here, but I'm going to be lifting. So let's put some water in there and lift the pigments. And if I find I'm not able to lift enough color out, I'll wash and dry my brush and come and lift a little bit more. And I think I'm going to push the shadows a little bit more. So I'll grab the pigment right off my brush and just drop a little bit more into the shadow side. And this is a convenient way to add extra color while your paint is still wet. You can definitely wait for everything to dry 100%, then come back in and add more color. But I do often like just grabbing some pigment directly off my pencil, as you've seen, and I can kind of push the shadows a little bit more, and then I don't have to add extra color or extra layers of color later. Then I'm going to use a damp brush, so I don't want to be too wet here, and I'm going to moisten the cake. You really could, in this case, almost leave it dry because the texture is so neat already, but I'm going to use a damp brush and just kind of jump around with my paintbrush to blend it. So I'm going to be able to maintain that texture by kind of coming in and just, like I say, almost like jumping or dotting. And so I'm not taking long strokes. I'm just doing a lot of just short little tiny strokes, kind of just like I say, jumping around just till it's blended. And since this is dry, I'm going to push these lines a little bit more, or I should say the pinks just a little bit more in the shadow section of my icing. Again, this is kind of optional. I'm probably being more persnickety than I need to be, but if you want those layers of icing to kind of look a little more separated, that's where you can just use your pencil and just gently, lightly sketch those in. I'm going to do the same thing to the left side of my cupcake liner. I really want more shadow to be on the left because as we've talked about, we want our light source on the right. And so I'm just kind of pushing the shadows a smidgen to the left. And then this is where I can define it a little bit more along the bottom of the cupcake liner and the shadow. I'm just putting a little bit more of that indigo, and that's just going to separate the cupcake from the shadow below it. I'll just put a touch more blue, and then I'm going to go ahead and blend. So again, I want to be pretty dry here, or I should say damp. There is water on my brush, but not a lot. And I'm just going to very gently come and moisten each of these little creases and folds. And as you see, when I get a little too much pigment going on my brush, I'll just dab it off on the paper towel. Yeah, I like that. So it's just a fine line here of like making sure you blended enough that you're happy with it, but you don't want to overdo. Let's just drag some of that color up into the liner too. All right, clean and dry my brush and just quickly go ahead and moisten these little shapes. Again, I'm working very dry, so I won't end up with the bleeding that I had earlier where all the shapes just kind of flowed together. Things are dry enough that I'm going to be able to just moisten that watercolor pencil and then leave it alone. Yeah, I like this. And now I've let my cupcake dry again, and I'm just going to come in with my terracotta and my medium brown and just throw a tiny little bit of texture on top of my cake where it kind of almost maybe blended out a little too much. Again, I'm probably being too picky here. And I think in this case, I'm not even going to worry about adding water because I do like the texture that the pencils provide when they're dry. And then I'll call that good for the cupcake. For our latte cup, I'm going to start the same way I did the cupcake, and I'm going to start with that axis line down the center. This is really nice for doing mugs, as I mentioned, and so I'm going to do that. And I'm doing a nice large ellipse for the top of my latte cup because I do want to have a nice area where I can actually draw in my latte shapes. So my ellipse, I'm just kind of going over it several times till I'm happy with it. Kind of freehanding this in, and just I want a nice loose kind of symmetrical shape here. So sometimes the best way to do that is to go over it several times until you get a nice smooth shape happening. And as I said, I'll link that video for cylinders and ellipses in the description below. Then I'm just going to join these with a nice kind of curved line. So I'm connecting the top and the bottom ellipses together, and that's forming our mug. Then I'm going to do another ellipse here, and it's actually running behind the cup a little bit, isn't it? And this is going to be our saucer. So again, I'm doing an ellipse, and I'm trying to keep the ellipses kind of with the same amount of, I guess you could say, openness to them. In some cases, you might want to shrink your ellipses so that they're not as open, and I've definitely done that with some of my drawings, but again, because I want to have space for my latte, I've made these ellipses to be almost round like circles, but they are still ellipses. Then I'm going to come in here, following that same line of my top ellipse, I'm going to draw in the top of my latte. So this is where the latte foam is going to end up kind of coming up to. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw the handle. And you can always look at a reference photo if you want to for this. I did use a reference photo that I didn't follow completely, but I did use it as a guide. Then I'm going to draw a line kind of right through the top of my latte. You know what? Actually, let's do it a little bit this way. Yeah, I think I like that better. And this is going to be a guide for me for drawing my heart or the foam in my latte cup. So I'm just going to kind of make the heart so that half of it is on either side of this line. It's going to help me have a little more structure to my latte design here. And then I'm going to do these little lines that kind of end up surrounding the heart, and they sort of have a slight, I don't know if you want to say like almost like a teardrop shape, if you will, but these are again where the white parts of the foam are going to be. So I'm just kind of freehanding these in. I have played a little bit with drawing lattes before, although I can't say I'm a latte connoisseur. I just think they're really cute to look at. So let's just go ahead with that. And then I'm going to do the same thing as I've done on our previous drawings and go over everything with my watercolor pencil. And since that's pretty redundant, I will just speed the video up as I do that. And I'm going to use terracotta to outline the shapes in my latte design at the top here. And then I'll go ahead and erase everything. And then to color, I'm just going to fill things in with the same pink. And I am kind of coloring in the direction of my ellipses that kind of formed this cup, right? You don't have to do it that way, but I do like coloring my cylindrical objects with what we call shadow modeling, where the shadows kind of, or I should say the way that I color follows the direction of the cylinder, or I should say the ellipses that we use to create our cylinder. But there's no reason you couldn't just fill this in with solid coloring. Let's talk about that shadow for a minute here. So again, our light source, we're talking about it being on the upper right side, and that actually is going to create a shadow on the inside of the latte cup towards the right because it's almost like the edge of the cup is blocking the light. Then we're going to have a shadow on the left side of our cup, kind of like we've had it on the left side of everything we've been doing today. I'll wait and define the shadows on my handle in a minute. Then I'm going to use shadow modeling for my plate as well, basically just kind of following the circular direction of the plate itself to color the plate in. But as I said, you can just fill this in with solid color. And then on the left side of the plate, we are going to have a cast shadow. Once again, the light is coming down, hitting the mug, and the mug is going to create a nice block where the light's not going to be able to come and hit the plate over here. And so it's casting its shadow on that left side of the plate. And so I'm pushing a little bit harder with my pencil, using the same pencil for now, but I'm going to just start getting that shadow laid in by putting a little heavier pressure. Once again, just fill this area back here in with a lighter pressure. And then there's actually going to be a little bit of shadow kind of along the edge of the plate here. And that's because the saucer itself is kind of rounded or curved. And so as it sits like this, it kind of blocks the light from kind of hitting that section. Now for my handle, I am using a reference photo to kind of guide me here. And if you do use a reference photo, you want to make sure that the reference photo kind of has the same light source, right, as the light source that you're doing your mug with. So in other words, you want the light to be coming from the upper right, just so that your shadows are consistent. But you can just follow what I'm doing here with my shadow. Just going to define the left and lower side of my mug here quickly. Just put a little shadow on the right. All right, let's get more of that shadow color on here. Again, it's really just, I'm still using the same pencil, just heavier pressure. But I'm going to be grabbing a darker one right away here. All right, here is my deeper, darker red / pink, and I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit more shadow about here. I want there to be a little space where there's a bit of light that's coming kind of at the side. Right there is where we're going to get a little bit of reflected light, so I don't want to go as dark there. I'll push the shadows a little bit heavier, once again in my handle. Maybe a little bit here on the saucer. And then finally on the plate, this is where we have our nice cast shadow, so I'm going to go ahead and get some nice deep colors going here. And you'll notice that I'm shading kind of with that shadow modeling once again on the plate. Let's deepen the shadow over here. Like I say, the mug itself is blocking the light, and so your shadows kind of reverse on the inside of the mug. And now you can see I'm putting a little bit of dark purple to really push those shadows just a bit more. Now for the latte, I'm just going to fill in the areas kind of around the heart and around these little shapes with my terracotta color. So we're really keeping our color palette pretty consistent today. I'm just going to fill it in, not doing anything special. I'm going to get a little more texture going here with my next color. Let's make it a little bit curly here. Okay, now with the brown, we're going to definitely color it with a more, I don't know if you want to call it curly or circular motion, almost like we're leaving almost like some little gaps in the way that we're curling our pencil here so that we have the effect of foam. And so you can see I'm definitely using a circular motion, and I'm not minding if I leave some little like openings in my circles, if that makes sense. You can almost kind of imagine these are going to be tiny little bubbles, right? But I'm not doing anything too special here, just almost like textured circular motion. I think we need to do something in the center of this heart here. What do you guys think? So let's go ahead and just kind of almost like draw some hearts that would kind of fill the center, just, you know, kind of like this. So I'm kind of just following the outline of the heart almost with the way that I'm filling this in, just doing a few little lines like this. Then I'll come in with my brown and just deepen those a tiny little bit. Again, I'm using really light pressure for the inside of the heart because I don't want it to disappear on us. I want it to be lighter still. And I don't quite like that little thing I did in the center, so I'm just going to lift it. There we go. Yeah. Like I say, I don't want our white heart to disappear, so I think I'm going to be good with that. Maybe I'll just throw a tiny little bit more pink here. Okay, let's go ahead and blend things out now with our water. So I'm going to fill in the lightest section where our highlight is with water first, and then I'm going to, as I always do, work kind of from the light to the dark. So I have to kind of think about almost like surrounding that light section, right, with my medium color. So I'm just, as you see, gradually working from that lighter area into the darks. And I'm even blending and using my brush sort of in the same motion that I originally was coloring in. So even though I'm not really maintaining a lot of the texture, I still am doing that motion just because I feel like it will help just kind of maintain what I have here. Finally, I come into the dark. Just blend that out a little bit at the bottom. There we go. I think I like that a little bit better. And then with the handle, the same thing, come in the light sections, blend them. And once I'm done with my lights, I'll come into the dark. And the dark kind of I'm just blending it just enough to get everything moistened, and it's almost like it just gently flows. Those colors just gently kind of mingle together, right, between the lights and the darks. So don't want to do anything too crazy on the handle. And now, I guess what we can do is the inside of the cup, just the pink part, and then we'll have to let it dry. So once again, lights first. Try and maintain a nice smooth edge to the top of the cup there, or the mug. And then I'll come in here and again, do our darks. Get it just so. I might even pull some of the dark out from my dark section and just drag it a little bit more this direction. And then I'll just very gently with the tip of my brush, and it's not very wet, but just use the tip of my brush to kind of refine the top edge of my mug. I feel like it's a little bit, I don't know, a little bit wonky, so I'm trying to fix it. Yeah, I think that's okay. Not perfect, but okay. All right, I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'll come in and do the foam on the latte. So I'm going to start, as always, in my lightest sections, and this time I'm definitely using a bouncing motion to moisten this. So my brush has some water, not too much, but I'm absolutely kind of bouncing up and down, up and down, up and down as I moisten the heart, because I want to maintain the texture that we kind of got with our watercolor pencil coloring, right? Then I'm going to gradually work my way out into the browns. Again, maintaining that bouncing motion. So this is where you can have a case of the shakes. I'm just going to go over the entire section of brown. You don't want to be too wet for this because you don't want to lose your texture. So like I say, you want to have enough water on your brush that it blends, but not so much that you drown your latte. It's one of those things you're going to get a feel for as you do it. You'll know if you have too much water, things are going to start disappearing on you or just washing out too much. And if you're too dry, things won't blend. So it's actually not too hard to learn water control with watercolor pencils. Then I'm going to use a little bit of my medium brown. I'm going to lift it right off the brush, right off the pencil with the tip of my brush, and I'm going to drop it into the right side of my latte. So this is again where there's going to be a cast shadow because the edge of the cup is kind of casting a shadow into the latte shape here. And so I'm just dropping that dark color to kind of increase the shadows that are over here. And as you know, everything is still damp, and so it's just blending in nicely, and I'm still dropping it in using that little bouncy motion so that I do have a bit of texture still happening over here. Finally, we get onto the saucer, and we're doing it the same way as we've been doing everything else, starting in our lights and working our way into the darks. So you can see me doing that here. And I'm going to be leaving that little back piece that you can see through the handle of the mug. I'm going to leave that alone for now. I want to work on this larger shape and keep everything more or less wet so that I get all of the shadows kind of blended in before it gets dry. So I'm just kind of moving into my shadow here. Then I'm going to wash and dry my brush and come over to this side where it's light. And I'm basically going to be blending from the light to the dark on both sides. So I'm kind of almost coming from both sides and enclosing that shadow in. And I'm hoping that everything's going to be wet enough that it will just all blend together smoothly. And you'll notice I am stroking my brush with the same sort of, I guess you could say the directional stroke of the way that I colored where I did the shadow modeling. Now that's totally optional, but I kind of like the way that does look on the plate. It really does give it that circular effect. But like I say, that's optional. And then last but not least, I can come in and do this final little shape, and that's pretty simple. If you had as much fun with this project as I did today, you'll want to check out my video on how to draw mugs for beginners. Or if you really enjoy working in watercolor pencils, check out my watercolor pencil playlist for more videos like this one. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that this will enhance your Valentine celebration, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!